to another How to Hex session. As always, these are super snappy, quick, fast-paced demos on a specific feature or sort of core workflow of Hex. I'm going to take around 15 minutes or so and show you how to Hex, or rather how to use a very specific part of Hex. And then we'll have 15 minutes for audience questions, sort of guided improv demos. You can guide me to look at any part of the product you want, or dive deeper on something that I talked about, or just answer any questions you have. So please ask questions, because I've only got 15 minutes of demo. So this will be a boring half hour if you don't have lots of questions. Use the Zoom Q&A or the chat to ask your questions. And we're going to be talking about magic. What is magic? If you aren't familiar at all, you're probably like, why is this guy talking about magic? We've branded our AI assistant called Magic. We've called it Magic. So Hex Magic is an AI assistant that lives inside of every Hex project and gives you AI tools to write and edit SQL, Python, charts. And as of a new release last week, which I'm going to be showing you, the ability to generate actually multiple chains of SQL, Python, and chart cells in your notebook. So you can, rapidly build projects, answer questions faster, and just like generally get more done. I'm going to walk through some of the capabilities of Magic hands-on, and hopefully I'm going to blow your mind with ways that you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's going to make my own workflows so much easier. But just a quick note before we kick into demo mode, which we're about to do. I just want to kind of set the tone and be really clear, like we're not trying to build some AI data analyst that's gonna like, you click the green start button and it like does your entire job for you or replaces you. Like there's so much like nuance and business knowledge and context that comes to bear in like the actual extraction and application of insights. That's where actual like business value and analytics comes from. And AI does like a pretty poor job of that actually compared to pretty much any analyst. But what it can do is make your day-to-day workflows a lot easier and a lot faster, save you tons of time you'd spend Googling, like debugging or just like writing boilerplate SQL or Python. So this is a tool for human augmentation that I'm going to show you, not human replacement. And it's also not 100% perfect. Like I'm sure you've used AI tools before and they can be a little funny and sometimes make mistakes. And maybe if we're lucky today, you'll see it make a mistake live, and I'll sort of explain to you why it made that mistake and how you can take steps inside of Hex actually to prevent further mistakes. So just bear that in mind. But without further ado, let's go for it. So I'm going to pop into Hex. I'll dismiss this little banner. And we're going to open a new Hex project. And I'll make this a little bit bigger for you. And let me know if you want me to make the screen or font size even bigger. And right from the like zero state or from the blank project state of a new Hex project, you now see, in addition to like add a SQL cell to begin or a Python cell, we now have this magic prompt bar that lets you like kickstart an analysis with AI. And this is actually like the place I've been using Magic maybe the most lately, or since we built this. It just released last week actually. So like to really kickstart an analysis. And what I mean by that is like, I've just clicked new project. I have a question in my head. I have like an idea in my head. And the task I have ahead of me is to like translate that question into like figuring out what database tables I'm going to need and writing a SQL query to like get started, and sort of this initial like beginning process of exploring the data and kind of getting the lay of the land, for me at least, always comes with like a lot of inertia. It's always like that little foothold step is actually like always more of a pain in the butt than I think it's going to be. And you have to like kind of go spelunking around to find stuff. And Magic is really, really, really good at kickstarting these things for you. So I'm going to paste this so you don't have to watch me type. But I'm going to like tell it what I'm going to do: a survival analysis, custom order patterns. Let's start by just like getting order info and looking at some overall stats about them. And you can see this is hooked up to my Snowflake warehouse, and I'll hit enter. And Magic will start working on this for me. And it starts with a SQL query, which is exactly what I would do here, because we got to go get some data from the warehouse. It's able to find that dim orders table in our production analytics database, write a nice little date function for me, which like that's another thing I use Magic for a lot. I never get those right. I'm not sure why this would have errored right now. Let me just try and clear this out. I'll try this again. Oh, I think it's because it's modeling a histogram. But if we click order date or ordered at, we see pretty much like exactly what I wanted to get, which is, I've got the right table, I'm pointed at the right place, it filtered down the data accurately, and I get like a general sense of the data I'm working with before I dive into like the more complex nuts and bolts of my project. And I want to just pause here for a moment and highlight a couple of interesting things that Magic just did. It found the right table, and we'll talk a little bit later about how it was able to do that. I didn't tell it like use this table or make sure you look in analytics prod, not staging, not dev. I was just like, I want to look at customer order patterns, and it was able to map to that, which is really critical if you want to build an AI that's actually useful and doesn't just kind of like get in your way and act stupid. So there's some interesting things to talk about there. It was able to write the state function correctly, knew I'm running Snowflake. And it built this chart cell, and there's a couple of like interesting little nice details here. Like it formatted the dollar values with a dollar format, which is kind of buried down in I don't even know where it is actually. If I were a human editing this, which maybe says something about my hex skill level. Yeah, here in y-axis format currency, there's like this buried setting to make the chart just that much more polished. And Magic did that for me automatically, so I didn't have to go spelunking through the chart. And generation aside, I want to pause on this interesting state that we're in right now. So right now, Magic has sort of generated work for me. It's written a SQL query, it's created a chart, and I'm in this state where it's like, what would you like to change? And I haven't actually yet accepted this code yet. I'm in this like discard, resume state. What I can do is move through this work with Magic and edit anything I want, either with AI or manually. So like, maybe I actually like, oh, I want to look at actually the past 3 years of data. I can just click into the SQL query and tweak this manually, and everything will rerun. And this like, might not seem that exciting. But if you've ever tried to write SQL and stuff with ChatGPT, this is actually like a huge pain in the butt. It's like, no, I just want to change one little thing. And then it's like, as an AI language model, like you have to go through this whole chat interface to get even minor things done. And so we've brought like the best of chat sort of to a Hex project where you can work manually, change whatever you want by hand, but use AI to speed you up wherever it makes sense. So like I just edited that manually. We'll change that back to 2. And maybe now we'll edit this with Magic and do something that that I wouldn't want to do by hand. Let's say like, okay, let's also join in info about customers. I just want to see like customer demographic info on each order record. And this is the case where like, I'd have to go back to the warehouse and like remind myself, oh yeah, is it dim customers? Is it just customers? What's that table? What's the join key? Is it customer ID? Is it customer name? And then I'd have to, like type out all of these. Yeah, exactly. Like all of these customer fields manually. And it's not that I couldn't do this. I totally could, but it would have been kind of a pain in the butt. And now I just have to hit enter, and the query is sort of seamlessly added, re-executed, and now I have all the data that I'm looking for. I think that's a really, really good example, actually, of the places where Magic has this kind of like I've been using it for so long now that I almost don't even notice the speed up. But it's just kind of like effortless insertion or integration into your existing workflow that just lets you work faster. And again, right, this isn't a like, oh, mind blowing, like everything is different. It's like, no, you're able to just do your work faster and more confidently. I think that's really not to be underestimated, right? Like this tool is here wherever you need it, and you can use it to change charts or change SQL or write code. But then as soon as you're done, you just click done, and it vanishes, and you're no longer in this sort of rigid walled natural language AI world. You're just in a Hex project where you can edit SQL manually. And I think that sort of efficiency boost is really not to be underestimated. It's never in your way when you don't want it. Okay, so let's look at one more thing before I open it up for questions, which is Python generation, because Magic didn't need to use Python up here, so it didn't choose to. But you can use Magic to write Python as well, which for some like more SQL forward people can actually be really helpful. I'm comfortable with pandas, but I'm always tripping up over silly panda syntax or like weird, crazy Python packages that you have to go and Google the documentation for, and it can be a drag. So like, what information do we have here? Let's say I want to see if customer age is correlated with their total number of orders. Build me a correlation, oops, I spelled that wrong, matrix against calculated age and order volume. And I want to highlight something here, which is that we can actually @mention specific data sets here. So I can hit @ to tag orders over the last 2 years. You can also do this in SQL cells. And in SQL, you can actually specific tables from your warehouse to point Magic specifically at something to use. It often is able to just infer these, but if you want to point it at something specific, either a data frame from your project or a warehouse table, it's a really, really helpful piece of functionality here. So let's ask it to do this, which again is like something that I'd be able to easily figure out how to do, but it might have been sort of a pain in the butt. It's like twiddling with the date functions here, doing a pandas group by, which I always like sort of messing up, and building this little .core matrix here, and I hit enter, and it'll return this for me and show me exactly what I wanted, which is the level of correlation between orders and age. And the last thing that I'll show you is Magic Fix. And Magic has actually been doing quite well and not breaking, but let's break something intentionally that like feels reasonable. Let's say like .remove duplicates. Like say I was writing this by hand and I was just like .remove duplicates. This is going to error because there is no pandas function called .remove duplicates. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, like what? And like you could imagine this being a more complicated error, or like maybe you've never used pandas before and you're like, oh, what? We have this fix with Magic button that will stream in with a like really easy to see highlighted diff view, an updated version of your exact code with nothing changed but the specific problem. And this works in Python, where I usually use it if I'm working with like a package that I haven't used before and I've made a mistake or written like, the wrong function name or method. But it also works in SQL. And as soon as this finishes streaming in, I'll show a SQL example as well. And again, in SQL, it can actually do really complex fixes for you. And I've shown pretty simple examples here, but I use Magic for pretty complex things often, especially like when you need to write really, really complex SQL queries. Actually, so here, yeah, it fixed that drop duplicates problem. I'll keep this, run it, it'll be great. We could say like build a like daily active and like build daily active customers and monthly active customer lists and compare the DAO now ratios. And so in a case where you have like a bunch of CTEs and complex queries, it can be really, really difficult to debug even simple little things like maybe a like extra comma trailing somewhere. And just sort of, you can think like as the complexity and scale of the project you're working in grows, it gets harder and harder to debug even tiny little simple things that Magic has like a pretty much 100% hit rate at debugging. So I often, like when I get an error, I pretty much always hit Magic Fix to apply a Magic generated fix. So like, let's run this complicated, well, not that complicated, but like vaguely complicated query, and you can just click, fix with Magic, and it will get off to work building a fix for you. Oh, and you can also, let me cancel this. You can also use Magic to explode CTEs into multiple chained SQL queries in Hex. And again, this is just like one more of the ways that Magic is not this like separate chatbot experience that you kind of like go off to when you have a problem, and then you copy and paste the code back out and come back to Hex and paste it in and hit enter. It's like it's a really core integrated part of your work in Hex, and lets you do what you would be doing anyway, but a lot faster with more confidence, and just get more done. I'll pause there because I've covered a lot, from SQL generation, multiple cell generation, Python code generation, fixing code of various types, exploding CTEs. I'll pause there and open it up for questions. I'm happy to just keep sort of improvising. You can ask me questions to ask Magic. I'm happy to dive into the internals of it, show you some more information about the metadata management system that we use to power Magic. We have this thing called the data manager that consumes information from your DBT models and from your Snowflake warehouse, and actually lets you provide additional information on top of that to power these AI generations. I'm happy to field questions about any of these subjects. So please pop questions into the chat and Q&A, and I'll dive into any of them. Okay, Derek has a question here. In your example of pandas, if you needed multiple libraries but did not define that in the input to Magic, would Magic infer the needed packages, or would those need to be specified? I think I understand your question. Let's look at an example. I've sort of complicated this project now. Let's start fresh, and I'll just grab like some simple orders data or something. Be like, star from dim customers. Let's say we want to, oops, that was silly of me. Maybe I'll fix it with Magic. We'll see what happens. What I needed to do is, scope it to analytics.prod.dim customers. Yay, thanks, Magic. That was great. That was fully unscripted. But let's say that, I want to do something that's going to require a package that I don't have, like, for example, or here's an example, like build a simple, or like build and then evaluate the accuracy of a simple predictive model on, well, I probably should have done, let's do like dim orders here. I'll rerun this. I'll call this on the orders in data frame. So I haven't specified a package here. It's going to need a package. So yeah, it's like going off and finding some sklearn packages that it's going to need to do a logistic regression. And then, of course, because, again, it has pretty much encyclopedic access of like every Python package that ever existed, and their documentation, I can change this if I want and be like, use profit instead, and it will use the profit package instead of sklearn. So it's able to go off and find the packages that it requires. I hope that answers your question. Zeri wanted to know the prompt for the correlation example. Sure, let me see if I can, here you go. I'll just paste that into the chat for you. And there are some people that are interested in how Magic found the appropriate tables. Yeah, so I actually have given a much longer talk about this. If you go on YouTube and look up, well, I forget what it's called, but we'll send it out. I have like a 30-minute talk talking about our metadata system that powers Magic. But the long and the short of it is this data manager interface that I briefly showed is like a sort of really, really lightweight data catalog that's specifically tailored at helping Magic analyze data better. So you can see here that it's like, maybe we'll pop into dim orders. You can see that it's pulling in data from DBT about what all of these tables and columns are, as well as information from the warehouse about like what sort of field these are. And like if we were to ask a question about order menu items, it would know it had to unnest that or use like array syntax to access it. And I can, well, I'll demo that in a second. But You can also add really, really specific guidance here, like perhaps order status. Here it says it's like one of completed or canceled. You can imagine that, like if I went in here and I'm like, order status is actually one of completed or canceled or pending. Pending orders can also be referenced as in flight. You can provide like really, really, really specific guidance. And then once the data manager syncs, which can take a few minutes, because what we do is we take all of this metadata, we do some really, really interesting secret sauce to generate vector embeddings that basically represent like semantic similarity between a potential user's question and a table or a column or a schema or a database that might be of interest. So if I wrote in my prompt, like, get all orders that are in flight, or get all orders that are currently being worked on, it doesn't have to be an exact string match or even a fuzzy string match. It's more about the like semantic meaning similarity of my question or my instruction to Magic as it relates to a certain column, table, schema, or database in the data manager's scope. And it will be able to track this down. So let's refresh that and see if it's synced. This happens on a cron schedule every 10 minutes, so we may not have gotten lucky. But I hope this gives you some idea of how this works. We stuck in a bunch of metadata. You can actually provide other specific metadata, and you can provide this metadata in natural language. So you'll see some items here that are like, let's head out to like customers, perhaps. Yeah, here it's like dim orders is actually more reliable than order details. This is the source of truth. And so you can imagine that if I were running queries, it would prefer dim orders over order details, even though order details has some certain fields. And here I've said like this is useful for filtering on orders with allergens to give just a little more context. Okay, let's see if there are any more questions. I hope that answered your question, Chris. Please let me know if you actually want more context on that. Luke is wondering if Magic is completely within the Hex Snowflake instance. Does it hit outside resources? Is a great question as it relates to data privacy and security. The answer is twofold, or rather, there's like a caveat. When you run a Magic completion, like when I say when I sent this off to the model, it basically fired off the text of that query and all of the metadata off to OpenAI. We use GPT for our completions, along with like a bunch of secret sauce on top of it. But it does not send any of your actual data. So metadata are things like, table names, all of that information from the data manager. So like pretty much everything that you see here in the data manager is going to be included in that. But no actual values from your data will ever be sent off anywhere other than inside of your Hex workspace. And again, this is why sometimes it can be really, really helpful to specify things like this, because the model doesn't actually know implicitly what the values that are enumerated in order status are. And so if you didn't have additional metadata guidance here, and you were like, how many orders were completed last year, and you asked Magic that, it might return a where clause that was like where order status equaled like finished or equaled like completed with a capital C or something, because it doesn't actually have access to your data, which again is like great for data privacy. And it's very intentional that that's the case. We don't want to send your data off to, who knows where. But the corollary to that data privacy is that you need to spend a little bit of time on curation to make sure that you're providing the right metadata to Magic, because we do use that for context. Does that answer your question, Luke? If you go to the website to hex.tech/product/magic, or what is it? It's /magic AI, sorry. We have more information on our approach to privacy. You can read like a bunch more blogs and detailed information about this too. let's see. Oh, there's some questions in the chat as well. Do you mind dropping that link in the chat? Yeah, here you go. And there are some links out from there to places like our trust center, which has a ton of information about everything related to data privacy. And then we also have specific Magic data privacy documentation that's worth reading if you're interested in this stuff, because we've put a lot of thought into this. Somebody's interested in the pricing for this. Yeah. So every paid Hex tier comes with unlimited usage of Magic. We're not gating access to this based on how much you pay us. Community tier, which is free accounts, have a cap of 100 Magic actions per month, which are like any of the things that I just demoed, basically. But as long as you're paying us anything from professional to team to enterprise, you have the same level of access to use Magic. Yeah, Kenneth, as it pertains to Magic using the metadata from DBT model, this is what I was highlighting in the data manager there. You kind of have to look a little bit closely to notice it. But Hex actually syncs directly to DBT Cloud to get information from DBT. So you can add your own info in the data manager, but you can also see that here, we're actually picking up that metadata from a DBT model .yaml file somewhere. So as long as you've documented your models in DBT docs or in your model, that information will automatically flow into Hex and be used for Magic generations. And that's like the number one thing you can do to improve the quality of your AI generations. And we've really seen that like this metadata, both from DBT and any additional work in the data manager, can boost specifically SQL generation to a level of accuracy that's higher than pretty much any other tool out there. Because there are other tools where you can like copy and paste in the DDL to create a schema, and then it like uses that. But like look how many tables we have in just our like one repository. And like if this is our demo thing, if we were a real company, we'd have gazillions of tables, and it's really about finding the right table and then being able to include that on the fly. So again, that like clever semantic vector embedding approach that we take to taking all of this metadata and using it to generate a sort of like map of semantic similarity between a table or a column and your question, and then being able to include relevant metadata about like what an actual generated query should look like here, this is helping the where clause specifically. That's the secret sauce, basically. I'm not going to give away the truly secret inside scoop of it, but that's where all the magic is. Does that make sense? We have one more question from James, and then I'm going to call it because it is 12:30. James is interested in building an internal dashboard limited to SSO logins from James's domain. What version would you need? So you're asking a pricing question. If you go to hex.tech/pricing, we have a really, really clear table that lays all of this out. SSO is currently on our enterprise tier only, but if you reach out to sales and tell us your use case, I'm sure we're always willing to work with you to figure out how to get you set up. Azeri is interested in repeating the bit about that's where the magic is. I was noting that the real magic of Magic, and maybe I'll go to the page here and show an example, is in that metadata, right? The fact that here in this example, I can say join in order details and calculate total sales by category, and it's able to look through the hundreds or maybe even thousands of tables that I have, all the schemas that I have, the staging, the dev ones, find the right tables, join them properly, and then actually use the right fields. And in the example that I showed earlier about like actually knowing how to model completed orders, or like here is an example of me saying use like look at power users, and we've specified in our model that power users are users that have written or that have placed more than 3 orders, and so it knows things about your business logic, about your actual data model, and is able to, you're able to talk to it much like you would a coworker, I would say, rather than the very like imperative way that you speak to ChatGPT, where you're like, I have fields here and here and here, and they mean this. And like a power user is defined as somebody who's placed more than 3 orders, and you have to enumerate that pretty much every time you start a new conversation. We've essentially done really, really clever things with our data catalog and our metadata integration to do all of that automatically behind the scenes every time you run a query. So, you can just say, compare last year's sales with and without power users included, and all of that context, which is actually where like, the meat of the problem lies, is going to be inferred from the metadata layer. Does that make sense? If you have more questions, you're welcome to reach out to me directly. Just reply to the emails, and I'm happy to talk to you or keep demoing. Okay, one last question, and then we'll really stop. Luke has a follow-up to the metadata question. Does metadata persist across all projects, or is it unique to each? Yes, metadata persists across all projects. So this data manager interface, which I keep tabbing away from, this is workspace-wide. So every Hex project, every user has access to this. And actually, moreover, this information isn't just useful for AI, right? It's useful for people too. So if I'm writing a query and I'm like, select from, oops, can't type, within orders, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what kind of information I have here. I can actually look at this in the data browser in Hex, which is built for people, and I can see all of that information here. So it's useful for both like human analysts and to guide AI generations. And so this actually synced through. So now if I was like, return all in-flight orders, I'd expect that it would be able to add in that new context that we just provided to the data manager a few moments ago. So yeah, it's workspace wise, or it just used pending, but fair. Okay, I think that is all. We're over time. If you have any more questions, reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer them or give you more demos. Cool. Thanks, everyone.